It's kind of wild how a single legislative action can just, bam, reshape federal funding almost overnight. And that's exactly what we're digging into today. We've got a pile of notes, articles, research here. We're going deep on a really significant move, President Trump's new rescissions package. So our mission, if you will, for this deep dive is to really unpack it all. What exactly got cut? How does this legislative tool even work? And maybe most importantly, why does it matter to you? And what does it mean for, well, everything else?
Okay, let's unpack this, Ben. Before we dive into the specific cuts, what is a rescission anyway in government terms, and why is it suddenly such a big deal right now?
Right. So a rescission, basically, it's when the president proposes to cancel funding that Congress has already approved. Think of it like a clawback. It's all laid out in the Impoundment Control Act. And here's the key thing. It only needs a simple majority in both the House and the Senate, and they have just 45 days to vote. But what's really striking, I think, is that this is the first time this tool has been used successfully in a major way for, gosh, over 2 decades. Wow. 2 decades. So that's not just some obscure rule being dusted off, is it? It sounds like a pretty significant shift in how things work.
Exactly. It signals a real potential shift in the balance of power over the budget, maybe tilting things a bit more towards the White House.
And the votes on this were incredibly close, weren't they? That probably tells us something, too. Can you give us the numbers?
Oh, yeah, razor thin. The House passed it 216 to 213. That was July 18th. And just the day before, the Senate vote was 51 to 48. Those kinds of margins, they really underscore just how contentious this whole package was. A real struggle to get it through.
Okay, so that's the how. Now for the really interesting part, I think, the what's.
Yeah.
What specific programs took the hit in this roughly $9 billion package? Where did the cuts land?
Well, one of the biggest pieces, around $1.1 billion, was aimed at the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the CPB. And that, of course, directly hits major players like NPR and PBS that people know. But it also affects something like 1,500 local TV and radio stations all across the country.
Right. So when we talk about cutting funds to public broadcasting, what does that actually mean for you listening, especially maybe if you're in a more rural area?
That's a really important point. Some of the moderate voices, like Senators Murkowski and Collins, they specifically raised concerns about essential services, things like emergency alerts, tsunami warnings, flood warnings, especially in rural parts of America where maybe public radio is the main source for that kind of critical info.
Mm-hmm.
And you're also hearing from the local stations themselves, places like KQED in San Francisco, Houston Public Media. They've warned this could mean job cuts, maybe scaling back educational programs, that sort of thing.
Okay, so public broadcasting was one big piece. What else was in this package? I know foreign aid was a major target, too.
Yes, that was the other huge chunk, roughly $8 billion cut from foreign aid programs. And that's a really broad category. It covers funding for USAID, programs run by the UN and the World Health Organization, support for refugees, disaster relief, economic development, lots of different areas.
Now, I remember hearing the Senate actually pushed back on some of those foreign aid cuts during the negotiations. What did they manage to save?
That's right, they did. They were able to remove about $400 million in proposed cuts, specifically targeting the PEPFAR program. It's the big HIV/AIDS initiative. And they also managed to protect funding for maternal and child health programs and pandemic preparedness stuff. So some specific priorities were shielded.
But still, $8 billion is a massive cut overall to foreign aid. Stepping back, what are people saying about the strategic implications of that? Does this make the U.S. stronger or weaker on the world stage?
Yeah, that's the big debate, isn't it? You have critics, like House Minority Leader Jeffries, arguing pretty strongly that cuts like these diminish America's influence globally. The thinking is, pulling back creates a vacuum, potentially allowing rivals, maybe like China, to step in and increase their influence and partnerships. It's about more than just the money. It's about presence and commitment.
So, okay, shifting back home then, what did all this mean politically? What was the fallout here in D.C.? How did the parties line up?
Well, it was pretty starkly partisan, as you might expect. In the House, every single Democrat voted against it. They're joined by only 2 Republicans, Fitzpatrick from Pennsylvania and Turner from Ohio.
Only 2? Wow.
Yeah. And in the Senate, the only GOP no votes came from, again, Murkowski and Collins. So mostly party line, but with those notable exceptions showing some cross-aisle concern, or at least inter-party dissent.
And the Republican leadership, how did they frame this?
They presented it as a move towards fiscal responsibility. Tightening the belt, reining in spending where they felt it wasn't essential. That was the main message.
But critics obviously saw it differently. You mentioned the global influence part, but what about the process itself, the whole power of the purse idea?
Right. That's the other big argument from critics. They say this package and the way it uses the rescission tool kind of undermines Congress's traditional control over spending. It's not just about these specific cuts, but the precedent it sets. Does it give the White House too much power to undo Congress's funding decisions after the fact? That's the concern. It's about who really controls the purse strings.
And Speaker Johnson even hinted this might not be the last one, right? That we could see more of these rescission bills later this year.
That's what he suggested, yes.
Yes.
Which, if it happens, would really cement this as a potentially more common tool in budget fights going forward.
Now, there was one other really kind of unexpected piece tucked into this bill, wasn't there? Something about Jeffrey Epstein. Seemed totally unrelated.
Yes. That was, well, it was a fascinating bit of legislative maneuvering. The package included a non-binding resolution, basically telling the Department of Justice to release grand jury materials related to Jeffrey Epstein within 30 days.
Okay. But why put that in a budget-cutting bill? What was the connection?
There wasn't really a direct connection to the budget cuts themselves. From what we understand, it was essentially a placeholder, something Republicans agreed to include to, say, smooth things over with some Democrats who had concerns, possibly unrelated ones, and basically unfreeze the floor action to get the main bill moving. It just goes to show how different priorities and, frankly, political pressures can get bundled together sometimes just to get legislation across the finish line. It's complex.
Right. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive then, we've covered quite a bit, these pretty significant cuts hitting public broadcasting and foreign aid. We talked about the rescission process itself, this rarely used tool suddenly back in the spotlight. And we touched on the different views, didn't we? Whether it's fiscally responsible or if it undermines Congress and U.S. influence. Lots to think about there. President Trump is expected to sign this into law any day now. And as you mentioned, we might even see more rescission requests coming down the pike later this year. So maybe the thing to really chew on is how this tool, this rescission mechanism, largely dormant for so long, might reshape budget battles from here on out. You know, that whole balance of power between the president and Congress. What could that mean for policies and programs that matter to you down the road? Something to keep an eye on for sure.